Hey there. Javier Milei has really made a splash since sweeping to power as Argentina's president. He's famous for waving a chainsaw about to highlight his opposition to government spending. And Milei's libertarian agenda has clearly won him lots of friends around the world, none more powerful than US President Donald Trump. So when the peso came under huge pressure this fall, Trump's treasury did something remarkable. It stepped in, buying pesos and promising billions of dollars in support. That was a big deal for Milei because he has Argentina in what's called a currency band to help fight inflation. And without US support, Milei might have had to abandon that band and let the peso drop dramatically. But what exactly is a currency band? What's the US promising? And what does it all mean for Argentina's economy and the US taxpayer? Let's try and find out. I'm Carmel Crimmins, and this is Reuters Econ World. Every week we go deep on the economic principles and ideas driving the biggest news around the world. So on this week's show, the currency lifeline. So to discuss all things currency, I'm delighted today to have Karin Strohecker, our Chief Emerging Markets Correspondent into Econ World. Karin, hello. How are you?
Hi, Carmel. I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Can we get straight into the nerdiness, straight into the wonk? What is a currency band, Karin, and how do they work?
So a currency band is when a government, a central bank, would like to keep its currency in a certain range with regards to other currencies or other a singular currency, maybe against the US dollar, for example. And there's somewhere in the middle, there's various FX regimes. You can have like a floating rate, which is like total free float that is dominated by market forces, determined by market forces. And you can have a peg, which is on the other end, which means there's, a currency is pegged at a certain level to another currency, usually a big one like the euro or the dollar or something like that. And currency bands are somewhere in the middle, right? They help governments to keep the currency sort of in a corridor, but give a little bit of leeway to move either side of it.
And how do they actually do that? How do they keep the currency in that band?
So there's a few ways in which central banks and policymakers can do that. The most obvious one is direct intervention, right? If you see that your currency is weakening, you could just go to the market and buy it, create artificial demand, take some of your FX reserves, your hard currency, sell that on the market, buy your own currency. That will make it strengthen. Or if you see it's getting too strong, vice versa, right? Sell it on the market. But there's also, of course, other levers as well, like you have interest rates, for example. So if you raise your interest rates, automatically investors are keen to go into your markets and buy your debt because they're going to get a higher interest rate. They're going to get paid more to hold your debt, for example. And that will create inflows that create a demand that will prop up the currency and help it strengthen.
Right. Why would a government do this in the first place? Why wouldn't they just let the market decide what value the currency has?
There's a few ways of thinking about that. One is that it's much easier if a currency is stable, right? If you as a government, you have to pay for your imports, or if you're a country that exports, or your country, that has a lot of producers that import and then export, if they don't know what the currency is going to be like within certain levels, it will make their planning and their trading and their commerce very, very difficult, right? So this is just for planning purposes. Having a stable currency is generally seen as a good thing. As a policymaker, if your currency weakens a lot, that will make often imports a lot more expensive. So you can generate inflation, which is, exponential and running on its own. So you want to be careful about that as well. So helping your currency, stabilizing your currency is something that is very much desired.
So what you're saying, Karin, like with these currency controls, with currency bans, in theory, it sounds like a good idea. You're giving people certainty, investors, exporters, importers, certainty about where a currency's level is. But they've fallen out of favor, haven't they?
Yes, they have. I guess one big issue with currency bans and also currency pegs is that you really need to have a lot of firepower to make sure you can hold them. Because if they start unraveling, if they start going, they go in a really spectacular way. And the crash is then much, much more dramatic than anything else you might see. We really saw that in the Asian financial crisis. There was a time in the 90s, early 90s, when economies like Thailand, Malaysia, South Korea, Indonesia were running red hot. Mm-hmm. All the investors piled in there. They bought stocks, they bought real estate. Currency was really quite stable and gave an illusion of stability that was possibly not there. Because at the same time, a country like Thailand, for example, had huge deficits and they actually did not have the reserves to defend the currency if any sort of pressure would come. And as investors started to think a little bit more about those vulnerabilities and were a bit cautious, it started to unravel really, really quickly. It forced the Bank of Thailand to spend billions in trying to prop up their currency. Eventually, they lost that battle. They had to unpeg. They were pegged to the US dollar. They had to unpeg. The currency in the wake of that fell 50% in the months thereafter. And that has all the painful effects that you can imagine. Like there was a huge amount of corporate bankruptcies. A lot of them had borrowed short-term. A lot of companies had borrowed short-term. US dollar debt, couldn't pay back, went bankrupt. The country had a really severe recession. And that was just one of the blocks in Asia, right? And after that, these sort of currency pegs and very rigid structures to keep your currency very closely linked to a certain level fell very much out of favor. Policymakers now want to let them adjust to the macroeconomic backdrop to make sure that there's a natural level that the currency can find where possible.
Okay, quiz time. Argentina's economy has been going through a bit of a rough patch, but it wasn't so long ago that Argentina was one of the wealthiest countries on earth. In fact, at the turn of the 20th century, some data suggests Argentina was wealthier per capita than Germany, with a gleaming capital city to rival any major European city. So what nickname was often used to describe Buenos Aires during Argentina's economic peak in the early 1900s? Was it A, the Venice of the Americas, B, the Paris of the South, or C, the Prague of the Pampas? We'll have the answer for you at the end of the show. Up next, we take a deeper look at Milei's economic agenda. So Karin, talk to us about Argentina. So President Milei swept to power at the end of 2023. What sort of economy did he inherit?
The economy at the time in Argentina was really, really in dire straits. Like we had inflation that was well above 200%, which is massive, which is hyperinflation. We had an economy that had gone through various boom and bust cycles. The busts were big, the booms were quite small and weak. So when we look at average growth that they had over the past decade or a little bit beyond, we're like at just around 1%, which is really no growth. A stagnating economy, hyperinflation, super high government spending, and they were printing money, which fueled inflation, right? So that didn't really work very well. And Milei and his chainsaw, he pledged to change all of that.
So how's he done, right? Because he's prioritised cutting government spending, so moving the fiscal situation into balance, into a surplus, and also bringing down inflation. So how's he doing on those?
So he's definitely following through on his promises or part of them. There's still a little way to go, but he has cut spending dramatically. This has been like, a country that was where transport, utilities was heavily subsidized. And a lot of these subsidies now have gone away. He has stopped the money printing. He has brought inflation, I'd say, under control. Inflation came down to somewhere close to 30% on an annual level. Whilst it's come down dramatically, it needs to come down more. And the second bit going forward is going to be much harder. And I guess there's also a way to think about it, how it affected the population, right? Especially these huge, huge cuts that we have seen in spending. When Milei came in, around 40% of Argentines were living at the poverty line or below. Now that number, just in the first half of 2024, after he came in, rose to more than 50%. So especially pensioners, vulnerable groups of society were hugely affected. Like we see pictures of, soup kitchens being in higher demand than what they can ever cater for. The toll, the pain this has exerted on the population is quite dramatic. Milei would say that's, the tough medicine that is needed. Can he sustain that level of spending cuts over the longer term? That needs to be seen because, a population doesn't like to suffer like that either.
And the battle against inflation, the exchange rate ban is a key part of that, isn't it?
Yes, because Argentina is relying very heavily on its exports and on its imports. And so having a stable currency and having people not dollarizing and having only one exchange rate is really an integral part of managing your inflation and managing inflation expectations, right? If you don't know what the exchange rate is going to be and you live in Argentina and you don't trust it and you think the peso could be tumbling again, you're going to try and get dollars. You don't trust your local currency. So he needs to establish trust. He needs to make sure that inflation expectations, which inform, what you purchase, how you decide on your spending, that all of this is on a much calmer and more settled trajectory than it was in recent decades.
I mean, it is kind of ironic, isn't it? I mean, Milei comes very much from a free market perspective, the libertarian perspective, but he's relying on this band to help keep inflation down, to help kind of instill certainty in the Argentine economy. I mean, when he first came to power, there was talk about potentially replacing the Argentinian peso right altogether and using the US dollar. Has that gone away?
Yes, he was even talking about how the peso isn't even worth excrement.
Wow.
Talking about how
he's not talking it up.
Toilet paper. Oh no, he certainly didn't talk it up. And one of his key campaign pledges was actually get rid of the central bank, get rid of the peso. Now, I don't think there was really much appetite for that. And if you decide as a country to convert your currency into the US dollar, you actually need to have the US dollars to do this, right? And when he took over, the FX reserves were empty. There was nothing in the coffers. So he didn't have the technical means to actually do it. At the same time, I don't think there was much appetite to actually get rid of your central bank, especially, we have some smaller economies around the world that don't have their own central banks because they're so attached to bigger countries. But in general, Argentina is a sizable economy. They should be able to determine their own monetary policy. Getting rid of this institution, there was no appetite for it internally. There was no appetite really for it externally.
Okay, I've got some big news to share, especially for our American listeners. On December 3rd and 4th, I'll be in New York City for Reuters Next, our flagship live journalism event. The Reuters team of journalists will be speaking with some of the most important people moving markets. Think global policymakers, tech innovators, and business leaders. As for me, I'll be hosting a panel all about Trump's economy. You can sign up to watch the live stream or join me in person by clicking the link in the show notes. You won't want to miss it. Up next, Karin and I discuss why the US decided to intervene in Argentina's currency market. So markets recently got spooked at the idea that maybe Milei wouldn't be able to push through his economic reforms. He and his party didn't do so well in local elections. And we had this really quite dramatic intervention by the US. Can you just explain to us what they did?
Yeah, so this was really totally extraordinary and not something we have ever seen anywhere else. The Trump administration basically came out, Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, and said that they would help Argentina. And they offered actually quite a few things. The centerpiece of that offer is a $20 billion US swap line that goes from the US government to the Central Bank of Argentina, which basically, will immediately be a shot in the arm and show up as part of their reserves. The US Treasury has also said they would do direct peso purchases, so directly intervene in Argentina's FX market. Now, as far as we know, the United States has never done anything like this before.
It's extraordinary.
Right? So this is really uncharted territory. They've indicated that there's readiness to buy US dollar-denominated bonds issued by Argentina, so Argentina's government debt. And they've also indicated or are trying to engineer that with the help of US Wall Street banks, there would be another 20 billion in loans going towards Argentina.
I mean, it sounds like the US is going all in on Argentina, and it's not, yes, they might buy Argentinian beef and other like agricultural products, but Argentina isn't systemically important to America, right? It's not by any means its biggest trading partner. Why are they going all in on Buenos Aires? What's the deal here?
So what the US Treasury and what the US government is saying, that it's key for them to have a stable, healthy Argentina sitting on the continent, sitting, in the middle of Latin America. And that will be an anchor for them for the whole region.
Mm-hmm. There's also a strong, isn't there, political relationship between Trump and Milei, right? I mean, in fact, Trump did actually connect this to Milei's sort of political success in elections, right? Like there was that link.
Absolutely. He made it a very, very personal pledge, right? He was telling Milei straight out when he was in Washington that if you lose that election, you're on your own, pretty much. Luckily, Milei came out, luckily for Milei came out and had a landslide victory, so that US support seems to stand. But there certainly is a personal connection between the two men. They have a very common outlook in many aspects of running an economy. They're both against regulation, so they're heavy deregulators. They happily privatize. They're very liberal in their approach. So they sing from the same hymn sheet. It's
another example, isn't it, of Trump using economic policy to push through his foreign policy aims, right? We saw it recently with Hungary's Viktor Orban came back from a visit to DC saying that Trump had promised him a financial shield, right? It's a trend.
Yeah, now it's or maybe the beginnings of a trend.
Right. Yes, shouldn't jump the gun.
We'll see. I guess to say about Hungary, that is quite a different possibly kettle of fish. So Hungary is in a very, very different position, right? It's not by nowhere near in any financial dire straits, or not the ones we can compare to in Argentina. We actually haven't heard from the White House on Hungary yet. So it is something that Viktor Orban has been talking about, but we don't know as yet the other side. So could well be there's more coming. But we don't know as yet. I guess the interesting thing to think about is the geopolitics as well of it. And if you think about in Argentina, that 20 billion swap line that the US is extending to Argentina had an 18 billion swap line from China, right? And of course, China and the US, huge rivals, right? There's clearly an interest, by the U.S. administration to ensure that they are claiming what they see as their rightful place. The money in Hungary is a little bit different. Now, this is not a major destination for Chinese investment. Mm-hmm. However, Hungary has an issue with the EU, and a lot of the EU funds that are meant to go to Hungary are frozen. The connection has been made that, maybe that money from the US could be forthcoming if EU funds from Brussels are not forthcoming. And of course, there's the other personal connection. Once again, Orban maybe cut from the same cloth as Milei and as Trump.
If markets and finance are your thing, we've got something big coming your way. Our brand new sister pod, Reuters Morning Bid, will be your go-to market briefing 7 days a week. From November 24th, ask your smart speaker for Reuters Morning Bid and get that market edge straight from our experts in the Reuters newsroom. In the final part of the show, we hear about Milei's endgame. So, Karin, it seems like the Trump administration achieved its immediate goal with this promise of support for Argentina, in that Milei's party did well in the midterm elections. What about the peso? How stable is it now?
The peso is much more stable than it was. And at the beginning, when we had these announcements of US support, you could see that markets were testing whether, the US support would kick in or not. Now it's pretty stable. It had a few declines around the election where it got weaker, but actually since then it has appreciated. It stayed within the band. Overall, the peso still needs to weaken further, go down further. That is without a doubt. The question is just like, how do they manage the trajectory of this?
Well, because most analysts expect that the peso will have to devalue, don't they?
Yes. And this is something also that analysts have talked about. It is something that is expected. The IMF would like to see a more liberal regime. The IMF, like Argentina, is the biggest debtor to the IMF by a single country. They owe some 50-something billion to the fund. There will be more pain coming on the peso, but just not make it a massive falling off the cliff experience, but a managed experience. I think this is what they want to achieve now.
I mean, it's still a big gamble that they'll be able to do that, isn't it? Because even with the promises of support from the US, I mean, Argentina doesn't have enough hard currency reserves.
And there is a lot of focus now on what they are doing to actually build those reserves actively. It's probably, as an emerging economy, to have the US as a backer is the best. The US central bank, the US government as a backer is the best backstop you can hope for. But yes, there is a lot of more reforms that need to come. There are a lot more measures that Milei needs to take. Now he has the political mandate to do that. Although, participation in the election was reasonably low, so there's still disgruntlement in the population. But now, at least, until 2027 is when the next presidential election is. That will give him a window when he can push through some more of the reforms.
I mean, you're right. There is no bigger backer in financial markets than Uncle Sam. But is the question for investors how consistent that support is going to be? Is that something that investors wonder? Because, Trump did say that it was conditional. I suppose the comparison I'm thinking of is when we had, back during the Eurozone debt crisis, when Mario Draghi said, the European Central Bank will do whatever it takes. That really sent a message to the investor community that the ECB was standing behind all members of the Eurozone. Is there a kind of a question mark in investors' minds when they look at what the US is doing for Argentina?
Absolutely, because as you say, when Mario Draghi, he actually stood up here in London and said that in July 2012, I was there. That's why I remember. It's one of these things that gets etched into your brain as a financial journalist. I mean, he was talking of his own affairs, right? And as we have seen, policymaking in the Trump administration can be blowing hot and cold. Even when Milei was sitting in the White House, when Trump all of a sudden came out and said, look, if he loses, all bets are off. They're not quite masters of their own destiny. They have a big beast in their camp, which will be really, really helpful for now. But Argentina needs to bring its own house in order. And just by wider backdrop, Argentina is a serial defaulter. Right? They have defaulted on their sovereign debt 9 times. So they've gone from default to boom to default to boom so many times in recent decades. So investors are quite sensitive around Argentina. They want to make sure that they're going to get their money back. And they always have in the back of their mind that Argentina has a pretty choppy and pretty eventful relationship with its investors.
Hence the criticism coming at the Trump administration for providing this financial support to Argentina in the first place, right? The risk that the US taxpayer will lose out if Argentina isn't able to push through these reforms, if it does default, if the peso does have to be devalued.
And that's a huge point. So, and one of the issues that we have here as journalists as well is that, as investors, probably as a market at large, we don't quite entirely know how all the details work in these arrangements. we heard yesterday from the US administration that actually the US has made money on its recent transaction in relation to Argentina. Now, they didn't elaborate how they made money, but there was always a sense, they might lose money, but they said they've made money, but they didn't quite deliver how it actually all happened. So I guess they are aware that there is an expectation to not fritter U.S. taxpayer money away on a serial defaulter. At the same time, there's huge political capital that's at stake inside the U.S. I mean, Argentina is a massive exporter of soybeans, for example, also to China, of beef. So in some of these, they are competing directly with U.S. farmers who now find themselves, maybe not being able to export, and who are asking the question, why do you help those guys down south when, we struggle here? And that's the people who might be voting for Donald Trump. So there's certainly something of a political capital gamble that he will bear in mind.
What's Milei's end game here?
Well, Milei's end game is to win the next election, 2027.
Thinking about the economy.
To make Argentina,
great again?
I was going to almost say it.
No,
yeah,
I stepped in instead. Yeah,
I know. Thank you very much for finishing the end of the most predictable sentence we can say at this point.
You can rely on me there, Karin.
So yes, I mean, a stable Argentina, a booming economy. I mean, that should be a rich country. They have oil, they have minerals, they have energy, they have huge amounts of farmland, have a very highly educated population, right? Have good education systems. That country should do much better than it does. And people are hoping for that to happen. He's got time now to enact some of his reforms. Whether, people agree with all of them or not is a different question. But he doesn't have that much time. And reforms do take a while to filter through. So there is a bit of a time pressure here.
Yeah, you see that in other countries, like in Greece, for instance, it sort of got itself back in order from a financial market perspective, but the reforms that had to be pushed through are painful, and then they take time. I mean,
it took decades, right?
Yeah. And for the peso, the end game here, does Milei ultimately want it to move to a free float? Because there are some investors right now who would like to see that happen. They think that Milei should actually seize the opportunity now and let the peso float. What are the risks there?
The risks are that something happens and there is a outsized movement which will spook investors and see them ditch the peso. And Argentina is still seen very much as a high-risk country, right? As a high-risk investment destination. Not as high risk as it was, but generally it's on the riskier side of things. Now, we have come out of a phase in the global economy where we've seen one shock after the other, right? We've seen COVID. We've had Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. We have seen the wars in the Middle East. You want to make sure as a country, if you are on the riskier end and another shock happens, people will pull out their money out of risky countries. That's just what happens. They've retrenched to what is safe. Now, you need to manage those vulnerabilities if you are a riskier economy.
But while this currency band is in place, it does make life very hard, doesn't it, for Argentinian exporters? It means that their produce costs more overseas because the peso is linked to the dollar, and also for ordinary people in terms of buying goods, right? You see Argentinians going to Chile to buy like washing machines, right? There are these effects on the ground.
Yes, I think this is really a big task for Milei now, that what investors and what also I think Argentinians want, what we hear all the time is really want clarity what the FX roadmap is now, what's going to come when, so we can adjust our investments, adjust our purchases, adjust our expectations around that. And at the moment, they are widening every month the band that they have by 1% either way to make it broader and broader. We heard that Luis Caputo, now he's the man in charge of Argentina's finances and economy. He's the economy minister. Mm-hmm. He's one of the leading top speakers in that. He said he's actually looking to possibly come up with a proposal to widen the band by 1.5%. So accelerate that process. That proposal is going to come in the next 30 days. There might be more proposals coming. So we should be seeing more contours of what is about to happen. And Argentinians have undergone already like decades of really slow growth. And having slow growth is something that's very painful, especially if it's coupled with quite high inflation. And there's still reasonably high inflation, slow growth. That's a very painful position for the population to be in. And, it doesn't make you popular as a president if that's your voters.
Karin, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Carmel, for having me. It was great.
A big thank you to Karin for her time and insights. There's so much more to Reuters' econ world than just the pod. Unlock all of Reuters' finance and economics reporting from across the globe by checking out our website or app. Now for that quiz. I asked you to pick out the nickname for Buenos Aires during Argentina's golden economic age. Was it A, the Venice of the Americas, B, the Paris of the South, or C, the Prague of the Pampas? And the answer is B, the Paris of the South. And if you've ever been to Buenos Aires, you might have seen why. Its neoclassical and Art Nouveau buildings look a lot like the architecture in France's capital. This is Reuters Econ World. Every week we go deep on the economic principles and ideas driving the biggest news around the world. If you want to tell us what you thought of this week's show, please drop us a line in the comments section of your favourite podcast platform. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. This episode was produced by Ethan Plotkin and Eliza Davis-Beard. Sound design, music composition and engineering was by Josh Summer and Sebastian Summer. Our executive producer is Leela de Kretzer. Remember, for all your daily news, just ask your smart speaker for Reuters World News 7 days a week. It's available across all podcast platforms. And if you'd like to see the faces behind the voices, watch it on Spotify. Don't forget to sign up for Reuters Next in early December. Or if you happen to be a local, come join me in the room. Attendance links are in the show notes. I'll see you back here next week.